The summer of 1941. An unprecedented threat loomed over the Soviet Union. In June, Germany broke all agreements and treacherously attacked the USSR, and the huge military machine of the Wehrmacht inexorably advanced deep into the country. The picture was grim. Millions of Soviet soldiers fought on the western borders, trying to hold back the onslaught, but every day brought new losses and new retreats. The shadow of the most terrible threat possible hung over the country: war on two fronts. During this difficult time, when all the forces of the Red Army were thrown into the fight against the Western aggressor, a tense silence prevailed on the eastern borders, near Manchuria, where Japanese troops were stationed at the time. This silence was deceptive. The Japanese Empire, Germany's ally in the Anti-Comintern Pact, was pursuing an aggressive expansionist policy in Asia. The events at Lake Hassan in 1938 and on the Halkangul River in 1939, where Soviet and Mongolian troops clashed with the Japanese army in bloody battles, were still fresh in people's memories. Now that most of the USSR's forces had been pulled westward, the threat of a Japanese attack from the east seemed more than real. It was in this critical situation, somewhere in the depths of the Soviet Special Services, that the idea for Operation Snow was born. Its goal was not simply reconnaissance, not gathering information about the enemy. It was a strategic operation aimed at a global change in the geopolitical balance of power. Its plan was simple and at the same time incredibly bold: to provoke a deterioration in American-Japanese relations to such an extent that Japan, instead of attacking the Soviet Union, would turn its attention to the United States of America. If this had succeeded, the USSR would have avoided a catastrophic war on two fronts, concentrating all its forces on the fight against Nazi Germany. The name Snow was not chosen by chance.
It symbolized an avalanche, a natural phenomenon in which a tiny, almost imperceptible impact on unstable snow cover can cause huge masses of snow to collapse, leading to large-scale, devastating consequences. This operation was kept in the strictest secrecy. Only a few, the most trusted individuals, were involved in its development and implementation. Among them was Pavel Fetin, the young but extremely talented head of the First Directorate of the KGB, responsible for foreign intelligence. Next to him stood Lavrentiy Beria, the all-powerful head of the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs. The level of secrecy was such that many historians still argue whether Joseph Stalin was fully privy to the details of this risky and extremely delicate operation. Perhaps he knew only the general outline of it, and the initiative came directly from the intelligence officers and their leaders, who understood the critical nature of the situation and were prepared to take the most daring step to save the country. In those days, when the front was retreating eastward and Moscow was preparing for defense, every opportunity to avoid a new blow was worth its weight in gold. Such a grandiose goal required more than just a spy passing on secret documents. It required a person capable of influencing decision-making at the highest level, while acting in such a way that no one would suspect his connections with foreign intelligence. And such a person was found. The central figure around whom the entire operation was built was Harry Dexter White, a high-ranking American official who served as Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. Ishak Akhmarov, the Soviet spy who ran the entire network, used White, as they say in intelligence, in the dark. What does that mean? He was not a classic spy who consciously worked for a foreign power, received money, or carried out direct orders. No, Harry Dexter White was a man of conviction.
He was an ideological supporter of the USSR and, more importantly, a staunch opponent of fascism. He sincerely believed in the ideals of socialism as he understood them, and believed that the Soviet Union was a bastion in the fight against the growing evil in the world. He acted on his own convictions, while Akhmarov merely skillfully guided his actions, providing the necessary information or nudging him towards certain conclusions that White himself perceived as his own. It was precisely this ideological approach that made White an incredibly valuable asset. He did not need to be paid. He did not need to be blackmailed. He himself, following his heart and mind, did what he believed to be for the greater good. And this greater good coincided in an amazing way with the strategic interests of the Soviet Union. The pinnacle of his unwitting but extremely effective influence was his participation in the drafting of the so-called Hull Note. This was an ultimatum presented by the United States to Japan on 26 November 1941. The document, named after the then U.S. Secretary of State Cordell Hull, contained a number of extremely harsh demands on Japan. Among them were the withdrawal of Japanese troops from China and Indochina, recognition of the government of Chiang Kai-shek, and renunciation of alliance with Germany and Italy. Harry Dexter White played a significant role in the drafting of this document. His suggestions, his vision of the situation, and his insistence on certain formulations had a significant impact on the final text. Many historians today agree that this document was drafted in such a way that Japan, with its pride and ambitions, simply could not accept it. In essence, it was not so much a diplomatic document as a declaration of terms that were tantamount to an ultimatum, making the attack on Pearl Harbor, the American naval base in Hawaii, virtually inevitable.
History sometimes resembles an old, well-oiled mechanism where every cog, even the smallest, can affect the operation of the entire device. The actions of one person, guided by a skilled hand, could change the fate of millions. To understand how Ishak Akhmerov was able to pull off an operation of such magnitude as snow, one must imagine the conditions in which he worked. He was a so-called illegal. This is not just a spy working under diplomatic cover in an embassy or trade mission, enjoying immunity and at least some official protection. No, an illegal is a person who lives in a foreign country under a false name, with a completely fictitious biography without the slightest connection to the official structures of his homeland. If exposed, he would be left alone to face the justice system of a foreign country, with no hope of outside help. Akhmerov was a true virtuoso at his job. In America, he lived under the pseudonym Bill Grank. To everyone he encountered, he was a respectable, wealthy American, a successful businessman. His legend was thought out to the smallest detail. He presented himself as an expert on the Far East, which, of course, gave him a reason to take an interest in certain issues and get to know the right people. And to make his cover even more convincing, Akhmerov started his own business. He owned a fur atelier, a respectable, profitable business that allowed him to move in the highest circles of American society, make acquaintances, and at the same time, not arouse suspicion. Imagine a respectable gentleman in an expensive suit discussing fur coat styles with wealthy ladies, while his mind is preoccupied with world politics and secret plans. His wife, Helen Lowry, played a key role in creating this flawless cover. She was also an agent, known by the code name Nora. But most importantly, Helen Lowry was the niece of Earl Browder, the leader of the Communist Party of the United States. This connection was invaluable.
First, it gave Akhmerov access to circles sympathetic to communist ideas, which was extremely important for recruitment. Second, her relationship with such a prominent figure in the American political landscape provided Helen, and therefore Akhmerov, with a virtually flawless cover. No one could have imagined that such a person, connected to a well-known American politician, could be a Soviet spy. Akhmerov, virtually impeccable cover. No one could have imagined that such a person, connected to a well-known American politician, could be a Soviet intelligence agent. It was like an invisible cloak that made him invulnerable to the eyes of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Thanks to such deep and thoughtful infiltration, Akhmerov was able to act freely and effectively. He did not arouse suspicion from the FBI and remained unnoticed by their agents for decades. This allowed him to calmly and systematically engage in recruitment. His targets were not only officials, but also representatives of the intelligentsia, scientists, journalists, public figures. People who had access to information, could influence public opinion, or shape the country's policy. He created a whole network, like an invisible web, that entangled Washington and other important centers.
Each new contact, each recruited person became part of this complex, multi-level system working in the interests of the Soviet Union. Akhmerov's recruitment methods differed from the stereotypical ideas about espionage. He did not use blackmail or seek out people who could be bought with money. His main tool was ideology. He sought out Americans who sincerely sympathized with the Soviet Union, especially in light of the growing threat of fascism. In those years, when the threat of Nazism was becoming increasingly apparent, many people in the West, including the United States, saw the USSR as the only force capable of stopping this plague.
They believed in socialist ideals, in justice, in the need to unite against a common enemy. It was on this wave of conviction that Akhmerov built his network. He found such people, communicated with them, developed their sympathies, and then, very subtly and carefully, involved them in activities that, as they thought, served noble goals. Many of these people, like Harry White, did not realize that they were working for foreign intelligence. They were convinced that they were sharing information, giving advice, or influencing decisions based on their own patriotic or ideological considerations, for the good of their country or humanity as a whole. This was the most effective form of recruitment, when an agent acts not out of coercion, but out of deep inner conviction, without even suspecting that he is being directed. After the end of the Great Patriotic War, when the world began to gradually recover from the terrible destruction, the merits of Iskak Akhmerov were duly appreciated in his homeland. In 1945, he was awarded the Order of the Red Banner, one of the highest military awards of the Soviet Union, which was presented for exceptional bravery, self-sacrifice, and courage in the performance of military duty. He was later promoted to the rank of Major General, which underscored his outstanding contribution to the country's intelligence activities. He returned to his homeland a hero, although his exploits remained a secret to the general public. However, no secret can be kept forever. The Akhmerov network, which had remained invisible to American intelligence agencies for so long, began to be exposed in the 1940s. This happened thanks to Elizabeth Bentley, an American defector who was herself a Soviet intelligence agent, but who, in 1945, decided to surrender to the FBI and tell them everything she knew. Her testimony was the first, but very important, key to solving this complex espionage puzzle. She named names, places, and methods of operation.
Of course, this was only a fragment of the overall picture, but it allowed the Americans to start their own investigation and gradually identify the agents. However, the full extent of Akhmerov's activities and his network only became known many decades later, in the 1990s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union. It was then that many documents were declassified, including materials from the Venona Project. This was a secret project of American counterintelligence launched back in the 1940s with the aim of deciphering Soviet diplomatic and intelligence telegrams. Initially, it was extremely secret, and the results of its work were known only to a small circle of people. It was not until 1995 that most of the Venona materials were published, revealing to the world the names of hundreds of Soviet agents and their contacts in the United States. In addition, access to Russian archives in the 1990s allowed researchers to compare information obtained from different sources and finally piece together the entire history of Operation Snow and other secret operations. Operation Snow proved how a single point of influence can change world events. It helped the USSR avoid a war on two fronts, giving it time for a counteroffensive near Moscow. Iskak Akhmerov remains a legend of intelligence, whose recruitment methods under the nose of the FBI teach us about the fragility of history. It reminds us that even in the darkest times, human ingenuity can work wonders.